You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We're ready with our first guest of the program today, and a very good friend of the program, and we always love to have him on. And we welcome back Dan Kish, who is the Senior Vice President of Policy with the Institute for Energy Research. And I encourage you to go to their website, which I mentioned earlier, but it's the instituteforenergyresearch.org. They have so much great stuff there. Dan, just for laughs to start off, I noticed as I was looking over various things on the website of your organization that Google, well, they're having so much trouble that they need to ask for a handout to help cover some of their energy projects.
First, hi, John. Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me. It's always great for us all to shake our heads. If we could capture all the energy in that, I think we could run half the country. In terms of shaking our heads at what appear to be bad government decisions. The story you're talking about is something that popped recently about the world's largest thermal solar plant, which, by the way, according to the Department of Energy, is by far the most expensive form of energy that they have listed. More than offshore wind, more than onshore wind, more than solar photovoltaics, and then the cheaper stuff like nuclear, natural gas, coal, and the like. By far the most expensive. And they built this huge thing out in the middle of the desert. You may have read about it, frying birds that mistake it for water and ending up that sort of thing. And this particular unit, a couple of funny things about it. All of those engineers that put this together, and this is not a fly-by-night, pardon the pun, operation. It is Google is heavily invested in it. California utilities are always known for making a bad deal, but as long as they get to jack rates up for their consumers, they seem to like that. And others are involved, and there is a total commitment of $1.7 billion. The government gave them a loan for that. The loan payment is due. And so what did they do? They came in and they said, by the way, all of our engineering, all of our studies were kind of wrong. And the unit is only producing 1/4 the amount of electricity that we thought it would. Right off the bat, that's kind of a problem. Because, and this is the crazy part, it seems like the sun doesn't shine as much as we'd like it to out here in the desert. And therefore, we cannot make our, I'm not making this stuff up, not 25% less, 25% of the total that we estimated that it would produce. So right off the bat, your production is 1/4 of what you said it was when you were getting the loan. And for that reason, because Google, a genius company, and one of the largest utility companies in the United States out in California, got it wrong, their loan payment is due, and they would like the government to give them a grant for about $550 million of that loan payment. And that's what they're asking for. And the Department of Energy under President Obama is considering this good faith request by these companies that are all smarter than the rest of us.
I don't know this answer, but I probably do. And I would imagine that somehow Google has a lot of their operations set up overseas, so they're taking advantage of paying lower tax rates elsewhere, not the high American corporate tax rates. So, I'd love to really have that answer, but somehow I feel as though, one, they're not deserving of this special treatment, and frankly, I'm not for any of these energy subsidies, because I feel like if something's really a good idea, it's one thing to have research to create innovation, but once you have the ability to make and manufacture some of these products, I think if the product is good enough, or if the innovation is good enough, then it should be able to sustain itself. And clearly, a lot of these things can't sustain themselves to the point where they could be competitive in, one, producing enough of what they're supposed to, and two, cost-wise when they are compared to other sources. And that's the problem. So how do we ever really fix a problem if we just keep jacking up it. It's kind of like when the mortgage industry went under. If we just gave everyone who had a failing mortgage an extra $100,000 to keep making their mortgage payments, but never address the issue.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact of the matter is we have all kinds of different ways to make energy. Thankfully, we're blessed with huge amounts of energy supplies of all kinds in the United States, both above and below the ground. The government picking these kinds of things and then paying people to do things that make absolutely no sense and borrowing the money from the Chinese to do it, I just don't think that is unsustainable, as the Green Left likes to talk about. So, and this is a classic example, and it just shows you. I mean, Google is a very noted company. They seem to do quite well, and for some reason, even they are on the government appendage when it comes to taking handouts for bad decisions.
So, Dan, there's another interesting angle to this that I want to bring in. Does it strike you that perhaps before Obama drove the coal industry executives out into the not quite sunny enough desert with a whole bunch of shovel and lime in his trunk, that he may wanted to have made sure that these faux numbers actually had some validity? I mean, if we can't trust Google's, and with all their analytics prowess, if we can't trust Google's numbers, then are we supposed to believe anything else we're being told about the green economy?
Well, great question, John. And for sure, I mean, this is not rocket science. You go out, you put up a tower that collects solar data, and you do it for a while in order to make sure, and you understand what that, and it's a pretty simple calculation. It's not something I could do, but it's something that anybody with a bit of engineering background could do quite easily, and yet for some reason they fall short by a factor by fourfold in terms of how much it creates. And you're right, so you begin to wonder about it. And in light of everything else that we've found, you know, whether it's on healthcare with people saying that they basically just lie about things because people are too stupid, and that's part of the way you do it through lack of transparency and all the rest of it, you really do get to the point where you're beginning to believe some of these conspiracy movies, you know, that we've all watched in the past about how the government is just absolutely lying to us. And in this case, it's just on all the green stuff because it never pans out. It just I know of no great looming success from these government programs, whether it's Celinda or this or the others, and they're all in cahoots with big companies with lots of prowess at analytical skills and engineering and all the rest, and yet they seem to still, come up on the short end. So I don't know how to explain it, but Google can usually get me a pretty good search pretty quick. You'd think they could come up with this.
Dan, there's an awful lot of smart people who are working in the financial industry, especially financial analysts, and there's a lot of money to be invested. If something looks viable, like it's going to bear fruit, money will be invested, and it'll be invested in the front end. This is one of the other problems. As Brett said, research is a little different. I wanted to transition this slightly from an analysis standpoint. I want to get your opinion on the pipeline issue and what you think we're likely to see from a fight there. But I wanted to bring in a part of a commentary I really haven't seen much in the pipeline. Brett and I were discussing this issue just yesterday, and it struck me that the burden of proof could easily be shifted onto the insurance industry. I mean, you want to talk about an industry that absolutely knows how to do risk analysis. They live and die off that, and they have all kinds of incredible long-term trend data that, validates what they do. If you want to do this pipeline, and if one of your biggest concerns happens to be, which is a legitimate one for any community it goes through, what is the quality of the build? Is it environmentally friendly? Is it going to leak, et cetera? Could you shift most of that burden on by requiring a certain level of bonds to be posted, and therefore the insurance companies automatically will make sure the risk analysis meets the real world requirements, because if not, they have to foot the bill.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, and I have to feign a little bit of, or at least suggest that I'm not as familiar with the financial analysis that goes into these things. I am familiar with pipelines, though, and I know that, you know, the next pipeline that we build is going to be better than all the other pipelines that we've built. It's just that simple, John. I mean, it's like any other thing that's done in man's endeavors. We get better at it as we do it. The more we do of it, the better we get at it, and we get better as we move along. And therefore, you know, the best thing that the Keystone XL pipeline has going for it is that it's the latest pipeline, and therefore represents the accrued know-how that's been accumulated in the construction of it and the 2.5 million miles of energy pipelines that the United States currently has in it. And TransCanada is a pretty good pipeline builder, and all the rest. Obviously, when the obligations for, as I understand it, and this is why I'm being a little bit elusive here, as I understand it, part of the obligation also goes to the shippers of the oil through the pipeline. So it's not just the pipeline owner per se, but also the shipper of the oil, which tends to be very, very large companies, not even TransCanada size, but more in the scale of the major integrated oil companies that would be shipping through the pipeline that have properties that would produce oil in Canada. So there's also some obligations that go to them, and they take on that. So it's a shared burden. I mean, you're familiar with what happened in the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It not only affected BP, that was the operator, but it also affected other people related to it, partners, drilling companies, people that were involved in the devices that were on the ocean floor. All of them were obligated to pay something, although BP's obligation was the largest at, I believe they're approaching $35 billion at this point.
And that is significant. You know, I was watching, and I guess this is called self-torture, but I spent a little time yesterday watching MSNBC and CNN. Andrea Mitchell, and I forget the other lady's name because I just don't watch it often. And I'm watching them both discuss the pipeline. And, you know, they have their, you know, leftist progressive friends come on and they debate, well, but it's in the name of the environment. And I just wish for once that one of these hosts would just say, well, but don't we already have like hundreds of thousands of miles of existing pipeline? And if it was really so bad for the environment, then why aren't we making a push to remove all that pipeline? I mean, as if the other forms of transportation, whether it be a truck that's pulling a tanker or a train, which we've seen over the last few years, many derailments, including the one up in Canada, which is very frightening when that train rolled backwards into a town and exploded. I mean, I think there's risk all around, but it's like the intellectual honesty that should be included in some of these conversations is completely void from many of these networks and many of these discussions. And I think that's half the problem. You know, when you talk about, I'm going to go totally off subject here, but, you know, we heard this Gruber guy from MIT telling us about how stupid Americans are because we pulled the wool over your eyes with health care. You know, it's the same thing. If we just had an honest debate 5 years ago and said, these are the pros, these are the cons, this is just what it really is, then there's no hiding anything. It's just like it's either good for us or it's not, and then put it to a vote. And, you know, I think that's what we saw today. The House put it to a vote. Maybe now the Senate will act on it because they're afraid to lose another seat. But will the president pass it? I don't know. I doubt it.
Yeah. And I can't really tell you what the answer to that is either. He seems to be. He did this wonderful, I'm calling it the ugly American routine, from Burma yesterday, Myanmar. in which he was speaking with a well-noted Burmese dissident. And I happened to, just for the fun of it, he said that this pipeline won't make that much difference. It's not going to lower gas prices. It's not going to be, he was asked a question about it. It's not going to have that much impact. It's not that big of a deal, this, that, and the other thing. The pipeline's capacity is in the range of 800, let's call it 800,000 barrels a day. I looked up just for fun, Myanmar, which is moving from a police state to hopefully some more enlightened, and one of the things they're trying to do is lift their people out of poverty. Myanmar consumes about just less than 45,000 barrels of oil per day. You have the President of the United States standing up at a meeting before a lot of press, much of which is from Burma. The entire population of Burma subsists on 45,000 barrels of oil a day, and the President is poo-pooing the amount of oil that might come through a pipeline to the tune of 800,000 barrels per day. I dare say there were some people scratching their heads and saying, these people are just disconnected with what the real world is all about.
That is is an excellent point, great, brilliant point, and there's a complete disconnect from reality. But why you brought up Asia, so now I have to move to this point. But this climate deal that he's signing with the Chinese, I just mentioned before in a discussion with John that, one, I don't trust the Chinese at all because I don't expect them to do anything that will be an obstacle in any way to their economic growth or their ambition to dominate the world. And there's no way that you could look at anything to do with climate change and say it's a positive to economic growth or it's not going to cost them money or be a hindrance. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that they may have, as they're building things that haven't existed in the past. In other words, if you're putting up a new skyscraper, obviously you're going to take advantage of new technology. But they're not going to go back to old existing things just for the heck of it and start spending millions and billions of dollars on things that are unnecessary, just like we expect us to do here. And now, maybe it makes sense over time, but I always believe in replacement. In other words, Dan, if I have a car now that, maybe has some things technologically or maybe it just doesn't get the best gas mileage or it's not that efficient, well, maybe that car is 10 years old and I'm going to buy a new car. Well, that replacement car could always be a more efficient, better technologically, driven vehicle. That's the replacement. But to say, no, you have to take your old car and throw it away because we passed a law. And,
right.
You're putting an undue burden. And as we all know, it's a collection of these undue burdens, which has stalled our economy, stalled job growth. In fact, I think we could all argue that, we're almost becoming a nation of half of us are collecting something and the other half are on part-time work trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And then you have those who are just always fine. But I think we could do much better, and I don't see how signing on to a deal of this nature helps us. It hurts us. And again, I know under Obama we'll follow this to our detriment, but the Chinese won't.
Well, by the way, the thing that you're talking about, driving a car that might not get as good a gas mileage, but that is paid for, costs you less for insurance and the rest, and then having the government come along and say you must, in essence, destroy that and purchase a new one that gets better mileage. That's actually, there's a phrase for that. It's called destruction of capital. And destroying capital goods and destroying people's private property and capital goods and compelling them to do something which doesn't make economic sense because it has to make the economic test. Your old car that gets a little less mileage than a newer one, to you, the impact of that economically doesn't make sense, which is why you haven't done it yet. But that's beside the point. We've got lots of folks. Let's talk about the Chinese deal, so-called deal with the Chinese. Fascinating, actually, when you read it. What the president said is that we are going to double down on policies which will restrict economic growth in the United States, make electricity prices necessarily skyrocket, and have severe economic consequences for all of us here in the United States between now and 2025. And in return, you're going to promise to continue to grow, and we're going to let you, as part of this deal, continue to grow your emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, which, by the way, are already significantly higher than our own, which means you're also consuming more energy than we are, which they've been doing for quite some time. They burn, for example, in excess of 4 times as much coal as we do here in the United States. And I say bully to them. They've got a lot of people to lift out of poverty. But he has given them the green light to go ahead and continue increasing their emissions while we reduce ours by between 26 to 28% between now and 2025, in 11 years. And in return for that, in 2030, they might, it's not a commitment, it's their goal that in 2030 they will reach a peak emissions of carbon dioxide and begin to take steps maybe to reduce that if they feel like it. Now, my guess is between now and 2030, the Chinese, and beginning in 2030, especially if their economic growth continues and ours continues along these policies, which is just destroying economic growth and investment and incentive here in the United States, that their economy is going to grow as well, along with their military power, their ability to project that power, and all the rest. And so the China that we're looking at today, which is already beginning to scare a number of people, including all of their neighbors, may in fact scare the United States a lot more by then, as well as Europe, which is, gone. And the Chinese may not really care what anybody thinks that they're doing in 2030, and they will have been given the rope to run by the United States, which at the same time is committing and will commit, and the president's going to push with his pen and his phone to make sure the United States reduces its emissions of carbon dioxide and does this to the tune of about 28% reduction. So let's make ourselves weaker. You go ahead and keep pumping iron and sucking down protein drinks, and if you feel like it, when you're big and bulky and much bigger than we are in 2030, we sure hope that you will. Ronald Reagan used to say, "Trust but verify." There's no verification in this at all. It is all it is all just some sort of it's an excuse for him to try to pressure the U.S. Congress to allow him to do all the bad things that he wanted to do anyway. That's all it is. So he's willing to give them the store in return for trying to do what he wants to do right here at home. And he told us what he wanted to do back in 2008, which was make electricity prices skyrocket, and we need to slow down this growth.
But Dan, you could say the same for this as you would for many other sectors where we have yielded American power, sovereignty, and influence, which is hope is not a strategy. It's that simple. Hope is not and never will be a strategy. You can't be naive. Now, I will say also, I very often think
but
that...
But John, I'm going to say, I don't even think there's hope involved in this. I think this is a calculated, cynical ploy on his part. He needed some justification. He needed some ability to get Congress, to put pressure on Congress and to mobilize his base groups to do what he wanted to do without regard to the consequences. And so basically what he did is he offered the Chinese a deal that they'd be stupid to turn down because it doesn't mean anything on their part. And in return, he gets the cover to be able to, browbeat Congress and get up on his horse. And that's what's stunning about it. He doesn't necessarily hope or care if the Chinese reduce their emissions. What he's really interested in is pushing our own emissions down, and he's on a jihad on that.
Yeah, well, look, if you want to use a football analogy, since it's football season, it's like saying, look, we're going to stop doing any weight training for our offensive and defensive lines now, and when you guys are a lot stronger than us, would you just not use your don't overpower us any more than you have to. Be nice. And by the way, maybe give us a discount on hot dogs. I wanted
the stunner is they took us up on it, right?
Right, exactly. Now, I want to just make one mention too, and then I want to go on to our another subject very quickly. Is I just came back from China, and I don't think you actually need agreements. The air in China is atrocious. They know it. They have to breathe it. They don't need an agreement with America to try to make improvements. In fact, one of the things I was very impressed with all throughout Shanghai is the Chinese are planting, even underneath overpasses, they're planting greenery every conceivable place they can put it. So it's not like they don't live and deal with this own problem, but they also know that they need inexpensive energy, meaning coal, to bring their people out of poverty. And so you don't often need agreements. People will do the right, over time people tend to do the right thing anyway because pain, that's what pain is all about. In a few minutes we have left, Dan, I want to just bring up what I think is a very important subject, which is export restrictions, and tying that to whether or not you think that will reduce the price of oil or gas or increase it, and tie that to the fact that I think one of the most important strategic things we can do right now is drive the price of energy down, not just to grow our economy, but to neuter Iran and Russia in particular from building their war machine.
I believe in free markets, John, when it comes to pretty much everything. The real blessing is that because of technological advances in private property in the United States, we've had this world-changing impact on oil prices because of increases in Texas and in the Bakken and in other places around the country. And what that is also done, though, is it's created, there are different grades and qualities of oil. And most of our refineries in the United States have been built to accommodate and make the most out of types of oil that come from either Canada, our number one supplier of foreign oil, Mexico, also on the border, a lot from the North Slope of Alaska, and then some other conventional oil. This is known as heavy sour oil that has been, and so what's happened with the Bakken and the things in Texas and the like is we're producing much more of the lighter, higher quality oils that are more on par priced with a Brent crude out of the North Sea. And what is happening is that we're beginning to push so much of that into our system now that it would actually make more sense to export increasing amounts of that new lighter oil to those places where the refineries are already geared to it, and then allow more down through the Keystone pipeline and the like to feed our refineries. The net result of all this would be lowering prices for everybody because of economic efficiencies that go with it. More free trade in energy, especially among countries that we can trust, like our neighbors Canada and increasingly Mexico. And everyone would do better. Our refining sectors would be better off. The production side, we've actually had significant studies done that show that actually the price of oil would lift a little bit in the United States for certain types of oil, but the price of gasoline, because of the efficiencies gained through normalization of the process without these undue restrictions from the 1970s, would actually drop the price of gasoline. So, wild as it may seem, oil prices bump up just a touch, but it goes down as a result of it bumping up a little bit, and it means more incentive to drill here in the United States, which is good for all of us.
Sounds reasonable to me. Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for taking so much time, as you always do, to discuss so many of these issues. Unfortunately, our show's only an hour each day, and it goes so fast that John and I say we really need to move it to 2 hours so we can cover more. But again, thank you so much. And folks, you can go to the Institute for Energy Research and put that in your Google because they need more subsidies. And go check out all the work and the research that they're doing. Great stuff, as always. Dan, we'll be in D.C. Actually next week. We're coming down for a couple meetings, and we're looking forward to seeing a lot of friends down there, and hopefully we'll have a chance to stop in and say hello.
Fantastic. I'd love it. It's always my pleasure to talk with you guys. And
that's my dog.
Have a great weekend. Good. All right.
We're pet friendly here.
As you should be. Thank you.
And have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you soon.
Same. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.